And now I'm going to do attendance, right? Here it is. This makes me crazy, but this is an IT thing, and it's just not working. So I normally don't do this, sit here like this. This is not how I do class, but bear with me for a second. It is 3:33, and if you were here last week, y'all would remember that I said I try to be attentive to time because we're all busy. And it's the end of the day and 3:30, so this dragging it out, waiting, I like to start as quick as we can because once I get through my agenda, I don't keep you just because I can, to 6:20. But I also don't cut you loose if I don't think I've helped prepare you for the quiz or the test or whatever. So with that said, we're only week 2, and I just downloaded the freshest, most recent class list, and so we should still have more than what I'm seeing here. So let me see who's with me. Hussein? Thank you. Missed you last week.
Yeah.
Okay. Sanchi? Makisha? Maya Angelou. Right? I read it. Yes. And Denzel Washington. That's the other one. I love him. I'm just having a moment here because yes, the bio profiles, yes. Rodica? Is it Rodica? Rodica, oh my God, okay. Andrea? Eli? Where's Eli with the curly hair? Sheila?
Here.
Yes. Alicia? Runcie? Is it Sanila? Conceala? No? Fatima?
Here.
Yeah, thank you. Faith? Priyanka? Nanakshi? Kwaki? Priyal? Oh. Wahi? Is it? Okay, I'll do better. Priyal? Niralaban? Benno? Yeah? Do you go by Ben or Benno?
Both.
Both?
Whatever you prefer.
Okay, so you don't yell at me, that's all. Owen? Fahim? Catherine? Ceylon? Is that okay?
Yeah.
And Tasia? Okay. So I see who's not here, again. Okay, so if you were here last week, I'm just checking in with you. Last week our introduction was all about being clear what developmental psychology is. And I made sure you had a working definition before you left. And the working definition was something like this. If you missed last week and you were on my list, oops, you already missed week 1. If you registered late, and I don't know why, but you registered late, it still means you missed week 1. Important stuff gets talked about in the first week of class. And I don't use class time to repeat everything that was said last week. I just won't. But I did come up here to remind everybody. Last week, I said as you were leaving, these are the expectations I have as you come back. That you would have looked at your course outline. That you would have reviewed your topical outline. You should have purchased either the hard copy book, my favorite, the actual book, or the e-book. I don't care which one you use. If you don't have either, oops, you're behind. next week is your first quiz. You gotta get your book. We're in week 2 of the semester. It's no surprise that you have to have a book. If you're deciding, will I get a book or not? Oops, I'm sorry, but that's all I'm saying. Last week I explained that the quizzes and test banks are all based on the text. And so I asked, have you purchased or obtained the course text? Have you looked at the study guides that I posted in your content? I don't mark them, I don't collect them. They're a tool. They're another way of helping some students learn, because some of us like to write things out. So I might say I'm one of those learners. So if I write things and then I put a star beside it or highlight it, I remember this stood out for me. We also talked about how we know from research in psychology that the first step in laying down memory, which is really important, right? Like during a test, you want memory. You go, damn, I remember it in the book and Miss gave an example, but you don't recall it. You recognize, but can't recall it. And so we know that to make memory, the greatest first step is writing something down. It's associated with muscle memory, actually. Have you read the PowerPoints related to the chapter reading? And have you read or made note about any upcoming quiz, tests, or assignment due dates? And remember, I said last week, again, folks who were with me, that I put the agenda up here, and it's mostly for me. I said teachers can sort of lose their way sometimes as they're giving a lecture, they're talking about things, and then they look over and they go, oh yeah, I was supposed to be going here, and we regroup and get back on. But for some students, they like to see, okay, this is what the class is about. Or, oh yes, Miss wrote up here a reminder, I better write that down. And some of you don't even write, you just take a picture, don't you? And again, you're shortchanging your own memory by not using your fine motor skills and writing it. When you just take a pic or you keyboard, it's a different process in helping to lay down a memory. It's amazing research they've done on this. That keyboarding is different from handwriting. And I think I mentioned last week about how for many parents, they're really concerned now that we are no longer making cursive a part of curriculum. Cursive is now optional. So the question becomes, what happens to this generation of kids we're raising who do not know how to do handwriting? Everything is block, printing. Well, we might as well go back to putting an X for our signature, I said. An X is part of the alphabet. So lots of things to consider when we talk about learning and how we best learn. That was the reminder, okay? I'm not doing this every week, reminders. You know, this is adult education, I mean, come on. But for us getting started, I wanted you to have a little trigger of memory coming into class. We're getting right into chapter 1 today. And I don't like to read things off PowerPoint. It always makes me crazy when I take courses still, and the prof or the instructor's up there and they start reading the PowerPoint. Like, what is that? You can read it. But in terms of bullets to trigger the biopsychosocial framework. Remember I said last week, that's a mouthful, biopsychosocial framework. So what did we decide we would call it?
Framework.
Yeah, let's just call it the framework. The framework refers to 3 domains. And there's a, thank you, Keisha, what page is that? 3. Page 3 in your text, they actually have what I like is a nice pictogram, and they actually even show the intersecting. Remember I said they are interdependent, not independent. They all cross over at all different angles, intersections. The biological, the psychological, or cognitive. Remember I said this is college. Let's start using some of this college speak. The biological, the psychological or cognitive, and the socio-cultural. Read it and read it again, I said, because right from chapter 1, if you don't understand that concept, as we move through the next 18 chapters, you're gonna feel lost. So the biopsychosocial framework, interdependent domains that affect us from, remember, conception to death, and I like to say death and dying, because we agreed that in these times, because of modern medicine and various technology improvements, someone can be in the state of dying over a long period of time. And usually we're pretty happy about that. If someone we love is diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer or pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive cancers and least treatable, pancreatic, we're glad to hear that they are living longer than what we actually expected them to. We can keep making memories with them. Yeah. So now that we've got that refreshed from last week, and if you're new here, you're hearing it for the first time, we need to stop. We say give pause to where did all this interest come from? How do we know all this stuff now? And thank goodness there were people, I'm going to say what my daughter calls it in the olden days, the old times, there were people who were curious, and we say questioning about childhood, how we all start. Your book talks about this. It tells us that in the old days, childhood was very short. In fact, does anyone recall the number? Yeah, 7. Now, for us in modern times, what grade are you in when you're 7? Yeah, roughly grade 2. If anyone has kids or you have young siblings and you say you picture a 7-year-old, in the old days, by the age of 7, childhood was over. They expected you to man up, as we say, put on your big boy pants, literally. They would go and work in the mines. They would work in the garment factories. They would be working in the fields from, 0600, we say 6 a.m. till 6 and 7 at night. Parents saw them, adults saw them, as just another pair of hands to help with the laboring. It wasn't until much later, closer to, the 19th century, and it was mostly here in North America where we say, Enlightenment started to happen, that we recognize, wait a minute, childhood truly is a special stage of development. They're not little adults. They're not little adults, adults in a little body. They truly are not cognitively, physically, remember the domains, and socially, they're not there yet. And so there were thinkers around, and here we go. I'll let you look at that for a sec, because remember, I don't read the PowerPoints off. This is just right from your book. Here's my little man. I love the pictogram of it, the old grandpa glasses. Probably just looking at some favorite pictures. So there were philosophers around. These were probably what we call the early developmentalists, questioning and studying. John Locke, an Englishman, truly from England. He's known for his perspective, his theory about the blank slate, tabula rasa. He said, children are born blank, and we write, now the metaphor, right? We write on their slate. We influence them and shaping them by giving them messages, role modeling to them, influencing how they think and the way they act. And so really, this is all about the importance of the environment. Remember last week we briefly talked about nature versus nurture. It's one of the debates over here, one of the most well-known debates. People go, oh yeah, I know nature versus nurture. I bet the other two you hardly ever hear about. We're going to look at those too. But nature versus nurture. And if he believed you are born as a blank slate and you become all the messages that are written on you, he was what we call a believer in nurture. That's different from the other John, a French Jean, who said, children are born good. Those little 6, 7, 8 pounders, they are full of goodness. And we mess it up for them. The big people in their life mess them up. His theory was something like this. If we let babies and toddlers, you know, the little people, if we let them just develop on their own with their natural tendencies, their inquiring and curious minds, he's not saying they'd be perfect. He said they'll make mistakes, they'll do dumb things, they'll fall and hurt themselves, but they will learn from their own mistakes. And he argued that when we learn from our own mistakes, we do things differently the next time. So he was someone who would have believed, if you were born to be good, what would he believe in? Nature or nurture?
Nature.
Nature, yeah. Just like Gaga. I was born this way. Love that song. And so she basically said the same thing, didn't she? As strange as I am, all my quirky ways, this is the way I was born. And so nature versus nurture. Nowadays we don't like to say versus, because it really is sort of sets it up as either this or this, like it's a fight between the two. Our most recent research says it's nature and it's nurture. Remember the gene pool? We had some examples last week. We said genes are about potential. They don't define you. They don't define us. But they're an important part of who we are. And so if you get the gene for something, if you get the gene for addictions, if you get the gene that makes you vulnerable to mental illness, bipolar, deep depression, schizophrenia, you don't know, do you, if you got the gene until something, we say, triggers it. There's even a word for that. It's called epigenetics. It's something that turns our genes on, like stress, like an injury, like drinking too much. Start drinking, you turn on your addiction gene. It's all about the brain chemistry. It's called dopamine. You know, you start triggering your dopamine, and that dopamine rush feels good. And so you start to recognize that when I drink this, when I smoke this, when I shoot this, the dopamine fires up and you say, I want more of it, because damn, it felt so good. And then let's just say something simple like chocolate. Ooh, the best chocolate, you know? Godiva, Swiss mocha, maybe not Kit Kat, maybe not Mars bars, but you talk about the high-end chocolate, yeah. Nature versus nurture. Just gonna give you a small article to read. that really does talk about genes and actually whether or not you think there's something to it. This article reflects some research that was done at a Toronto research center. It's called CAMH, Center for Addictions and Mental Health. And they have a sex offender program there, meaning they treat people who have been charged with sex offenses, and in particular, pedophiles. Is there anyone who's not clear on what a pedophile is? Okay. So, treatment of pedophiles. Is pedophilia a product of nature or nurture? Have a read. had to tell us, the 40-year-old twins are from Scarborough. Naming the hood again, not just from the East End, they have to lay it at Scarborough. But the truth is, we have pedophiles in every part and every corner of the city. You can be living in the upscale Forest Hill Village, Bridle Path, or yes, here at Markham and Eglinton, Birch Mountain, St. Clair, and you will find them. Interestingly, I think I shared with some of you last week, I was a correctional officer, a jail guard for many years, and I recognized the name, the Mumfords. There is what we call generational, right? Generational poverty, generational recidivism in families. The father goes to jail, his son goes to jail, so it's generational. So what do you think about what you're reading here? About what some of the initial research is saying about pedophiles being born with that, we say, proclitivity, what a big word, for that tendency to be attracted to kids, sexually attracted. What characteristics stood out for you?
When I was reading this, some of the things I've highlighted are some of the stuff that the studies noticed, like between pedophiles, right? So they noticed that they noticed that in recent years, some of them are apparently 3 times more likely to be left-handed and significantly shorter. And they also noticed their IQs are usually they're making like physical links too.
Yeah.
So,
we're talking about the physiology, we call it. In research, they call it biomarkers. There's something in the biology, it's a marker that's being identified. So the initial research is showing, interestingly, that many of the pedophiles were left-handed. Do I have any guys here who write with their left hands? Oh, yes, so all of a sudden you go, not even playing, thanks for playing, yeah, left-handed. So already they'd be saying, okay, he writes with his left hand. They tend to be shorter than average. Most of the fellows in this class are not overly tall. I'm not looking at anyone, but pretty average, maybe on the short side. The idea too about the IQ. Now, to be fair, their IQ is identified as being 10 points, generally, 10 points less than the average. 10 points is not a lot. 10% would be noticeable. I could give you a test or a quiz right now. You get a score. We mark your IQ based on the score. And then I give you the test again on a Wednesday at 11:30 in the morning after you've had brekkie, and you do the test, and this time you get better. Well, I don't think you've gotten smarter from Monday to Wednesday, right? But you were better rested, and you'd eaten, and you just simply, the mojo was there, and you were doing it. It doesn't really mean your IQ went up that much. So keep that in mind when we hear about the 10 points less, not 10%. But I think you're right. Our takeaway is, isn't it interesting that they were able to identify some of these physical characteristics and traits that pedophiles seem to have in common? And that is why when we talk about things like how we study development, how we study. Your book talked about things like we collect data from case studies, right? We talk to people, we ask questions. We look at medical reports, we do questionnaires and surveys. That's just very basic data collection. It doesn't tell you why. It doesn't show proof around why this male is sexually attracted to kids. but it tells you where he lived, where he went to school, how old he was when he first acted out. And so surveys, questionnaires, case studies are very, we say, elementary, 101 ways of collecting data. I followed this research for a little while, and then like anything that is government funded, at some point the money ran out and they had to put this research on hold. And I haven't been able to learn since then, I haven't been able to find what happened to that research. But again, this was happening in our own research hospital in downtown Toronto. It's fabulous. Nature versus nurture. We heard about the biomarkers, but remember the environment. We keep in mind the environment that these boys grew up in. We know that sexual offenders have often been victims themselves. Not to excuse, because frankly, many of us would say, well, if they were a victim, wouldn't you think, ne touche pas? Like if you were a victim yourself, you would never do the same to someone else. And that's not typically what the research shows. It shows that there's really like a split. Half never act out, never do what was done to them, to someone else, but almost the other half become offenders themselves. And this article talks about that, about how some of these boys were sexually assaulted themselves. So here we go, the classic, isn't it? The classic. The two other debates, just watching time before I let you go to break, all right? The two other debates, continuous versus discontinuous. And I'm going to write down the same idea about some examples, because this debate seems to be the one that stumps students a little bit when they have to give an example of it. Huh? Development is slow, steady, continuous. You almost don't even know that change has been happening. Stay with me. Little example. You get your hair cut. Maybe you got it cut middle of December because it's Christmas, there's going to be gathering. So you go in, you get your hair cut, styled, and you know how you look in the mirror and you go, nice length, maybe you got some color, it's good. Then it's the end of January and you're sort of out of the shower and you're fixing yourself and you go, wow, my hair's grown. Like it's almost time for a trim again. Or top up the color. Development has been continuous. You didn't get up every day and say, oh, my hair grew overnight. Oh, from yesterday my color went lighter here. You don't do that because it's so gradual and not significant that you didn't even notice it was happening. Continuous. Change is slow, steady, and often it's happening because of something as simple as what we call, again, maturation. Versus discontinuous. Think stages. You're at a certain stage of development, you accomplish certain tasks, you're changing in a way that is a lot more noticeable from one step to the other. Let me come over here. Development is start. noticeable? I think so.
Yes.
I hate when I do that. More
It's
noticeable.
okay, I think it happens to everyone.
Yeah, it felt right.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example in real development. And remember, you don't have to, we don't have to agree that that's right or wrong, because it's a perspective. It's how you view development happening. That's why these researchers say there's all different ways to view what influences development. So, the 11-year-old girl leaves for school Monday morning. She's 11 years old. She plays with her friends. They do skipping, they do jump seas, 11. She comes home at 3:30. She says to her mom, I got my period. Now mom, maybe, ooh, or, oh, she's 11. Typically, the research tells us, girls are roughly 12, and here in Canada, I can tell you, we're 12.8. Someone collected the data. Girls typically at 12.8 months get their period. So if you're 11, 10 and a half, and 11, you're what we call early maturing girl. What we do know is that one of the main factors that determines when a girl will get her menstrual cycle is body fat, how much body fat she has. So let's go over here. This girl left in the morning, we're saying a regular 11-year-old girl, only cared about playing with her friends, what mom put in her lunchbox, blah, blah, blah. She comes home at 3:30. Life has changed for her now. I like to say she's got one leg in adult body and the other leg firmly still in childhood. We say cognitively, remember last week we said cognitive is judgment, decision-making, problem-solving, use of language and words. So clearly, she's still an 11-year-old child. Socially, her peers are going to be the same. They're still her best girlfriends doing sleepovers, lunch. But physically, her body has now made a statement. She is getting a monthly cycle. And let me ask you, what will her parents now be nervous about?
We're getting pregnant possibly.
Yes. Maybe dad more than anyone. What? Because mom's gonna tell dad, oh, guess what? Today, and dad's gonna go, and all of a sudden, you know that boy next door who's sort of grown up with the fam, dad's sort of gonna be looking like, yeah, okay, I don't know about this now. And yet the 11-year-old girl, biopsychosocially, right, is the same girl, but not really. So, the example I gave you, do you see it as something that was slow and steady and due to maturation? Do you see her here, that in the morning she left in one stage of development, and because of one physiological change it's called ovulation, she now is in a different stage. She's not really in childhood anymore. 11-year-old girls have gotten pregnant, 12-year-old girls have gotten pregnant. They're at high risk if they get pregnant because their reproductive system is not sexually mature, not fully ready to carry, I'm going to say fetus, not the baby yet, embryo, fetus, zygote, then embryo, and then fetus. Not fully ready to do that. And so 10, 11, and 12-year-old girls who get pregnant, we worry about them just as much as we worry about the 42-year-old woman who's now considered on the old side. Both of those groups, high risk. So that's just an example that you can consider. The third debate, and this one's usually pretty easy to remember, active versus passive. Development is proactive, engaged in, promoted. I'm giving you action words here. If you are actively engaged in your development, you are doing things, you are participating in. I would say right now, by being at college, you've made a statement. You're being proactive about looking ahead, about getting the job, the career, the trade, whatever your own goal is. You are engaged in your learning, I hope. Maybe not. Coming to college is one thing. If you decide you don't like this course, I might say as a teacher, as a prof, I look at the faces in the classroom and I go, God, man. Passive means look for direction, guidance, and maybe how to do something, how to. This is not good and bad. This is a way, it is a perspective. We see that in our classrooms now, we still have very much this kind of system. We come in here and, you know, the idea is the teacher, I'm here and you want what I have and you sit and for the most part polite and listen and write. And so you look to the teacher for guidance and direction. And that's what we do in our schools. There is a type of school, a philosophical school called Montessori. Right. Montessori's philosophy is clearly over here. And by the way, it's expensive. I don't know if any of y'all have gone to Montessori. If you have, Mom and Dad paid a lot of money and love you very much and sent you to Montessori. It's interesting, I have, you know, neighbors either side of me, and how would I have known? We met each other when I moved in. And they're grade school teachers. One is SK, one is grade 6. And we share student stories, and we talk about the system and my one friend, who is an SK teacher, said, you can always tell when a Montessori child has transferred in to the public school system. I said, why? What? Tell me. Oh, they're not used to the way we do things in the public school system. And then the grade 6 teacher started, yeah, oh my God, I thought it was me. And so they start talking. In Montessori, the philosophy is children are engaged in their development. They are hungry to learn. They want to be in an environment where they touch things, push things, try things. They have to finish their task, that's expected, but once they're finished, if Makisha's quick at processing and finishes her task and goes, okay, I'm going to leave you, I'm going over here, they can go over there. Whereas whereas in regular schools, everyone opens their books, you all do that one part of the assignment, then you put it away, the next day you open it, you know, but Montessori says no. We go with where your child is at, and that's why it's a lot of money, right? The problem is when they transfer into the public school system, my friend said, they have a hard time learning to sit still, take their turn, wait until someone else has, you know, because that's not the way they learn. So interesting, if you think about one day being a parent yourself, and you say we want to do the best for our child, especially when we say the formative years in childhood, the first 5 years, Freud always said this way back. As much as a lot of his stuff now, we go, there were certain things that he was bang on about. And that's why we have psychologists who are neo-Freudians. Neo means new, and they call themselves neo-Freudians because they don't believe everything he said, but what they do like, they've kept, and they're still building research to show he was on the right track. So even the neo-Freudians would say, yes, those first 5 years of life. So as we go to break, I'm going to recap for you. I reviewed with you what the biopsychosocial framework was. We looked briefly at the history behind development. It was short, up to about the age of 7. Right? Children then were treated as small adults, but they didn't have the rights and freedoms of it. They better not give an opinion to dad and mom because, you know, mom and dad are still gonna, you know, they're still the kids. But philosophers said, if we recognize that childhood was special, and now of course we really do know that, we have child protection laws that we've put in place, right? We have a whole child welfare system that we've created because we've said, if you're a parent, if you can't be a good dad, if you can't be a mom who protects your child, we will take them and we will make sure they're safe. So childhood here in North America see it very differently. I would argue there are still countries around, usually we say in the undeveloped or the poorly developed parts of the world, where there is still child labor. There are still maybe not 6-year-olds, but 9 and 10-year-olds who are put out to work because the family needs every penny. And then the debates about development. So when you come back, I'm going to give you my worksheet. And the worksheet, the worksheet will help you, well, it'll make you get into your book. We teachers moan, we moan about how our students don't read. You're busy, you have a life, you are busy, but it's school and you came to school for a reason. That goal you have, maybe it's still 2 years away, maybe it's 1 year away. And so you can't lose sight of your goal. Before you get there, you still have this to do. And so when teachers talk about how students don't do their reading, it means they're missing so much important stuff in the chapter. So I'm thinking ahead to the test. You're not, we're not there yet. You're not thinking about it. You're hopefully thinking just about the quiz next week, right? And I'll talk about that again before you go. But I'm looking ahead to when you have a chunk of marks in your first test. And I'm going to get you really getting into finding things in your chapter. And so this is break time. You can take your 10 minutes now, get a juice, stretch your legs, and when you come back,
absent last week, and now you're here, so Patel, I already took attendance. So, what program are you in?
Software engineering.
Yeah, so is that up at Progress?
Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta get a book, so, I mean, I think the bookstore, I don't know if it's open now or it closes at 5. Does anyone know, is the bookstore, no? You can run right across, it's break time, if you're in a position to buy it now. But you do have to have a book. We use the book for everything, and the test questions and the quiz questions come from the book. So, I don't know if you wanna buddy up with someone or ask to partner with someone, and failing that, use your phone. For today, I'm saying to students, for today, you can use a phone. It's different than a test, okay? Oh, spare, okay, hon, thanks. Save a treat.
Yeah, I have the. You to hear last.
Yeah, I'll talk to them. Thank you.
So which book is it?
Yeah, HDAD, 4th Canadian, okay?
It's closed. I just went.
Oh, is it closed?
Yeah.
Why a bookstore closes so early, man?
And funny thing is, I bought the digital book.
Right?
However, I literally bought it like earlier today, and it seemed as if I somehow, when I created the account, I forgot my password, so it was a whole, like, on the phone for an hour, like,
Same.
trying to figure it out, and
Yeah.
then eventually, I just had to get them to refund me, because I was unable to access it.
Yeah.
my
Oh
God.
my God. But 4th, I mean, not only is it early, it's still the second week. Like, startup has
Exactly.
still, so why they close that store so early is beyond me. I've moaned about that before. I said, you know, we're still on campus till 6:30. Like, same with the cafeteria and all that. Like, you better not be hungry or have the munchies after 4
Right.
o'clock.
They actually
Everything
closed
is
at 3 today.
You're kidding.
I was like, I didn't have anything. Can
Oh
I
my
please have?
God.
I was hoping that the Tim Hortons was open too.
No.
It's closed, and I'm like, oh my God.
I say that, we're the forgotten campus down here. That makes me grumpy.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. teach SSW all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome in, yeah. And people, can I make a suggestion as you're going through the book? And again, we talked, it's one of the theories about development, you know, with instruction, role modeling, direction. I was taught this in grade school. My favorite grade 3 teacher, Miss Matheson. And she was my favorite because I felt like she always saw me, if you know what I mean. You know, if you have kids, you hope the teacher sees your daughter or sees your little guy. 30 students, I hope they pay attention to my kid. And I felt that with her. And so clearly I'm talking about her. She stayed with me. And one of the things she taught us was when you do a worksheet, you might need to go back to that page again. So write down your page numbers. My daughter now, grown up at university, finished, and I saw one of her workbooks and I said, oh my God. She'd written all her page numbers down because Mom taught her. She didn't learn it in school. When you're looking things up in a book, write down your page numbers. You'll get in the habit of doing it, and when you're prepping for a test and you want to go back to look at that concept, I wasn't clear about that, you'll have your page number. I mean, it's not a must, I'm just giving you a tip. You don't want to look something up 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And people, the one statement on the sheet that you can scratch out, because I had handed this in for printing and then saw that they had omitted something in the book, you can put a line through number 12. I'll talk about that later, but just put a line through number 12. Don't worry about it. yourself crazy trying to leave it. Go to the next one. Remember, this is a worksheet, you're not handing it in. So skip, go to another statement or another question, and we'll be taking it up. If we don't have time to take it up, I'll upload the worksheet and make it visible to you to compare.
people, I think what I'm going to do to break your tempo a little bit. So I did this worksheet for two reasons. First of all, to simply get you thinking again about the material in the chapter. Remember, a teacher presupposes, we say. We assume you've read before coming to class, so that if you get something like this, you're going, oh, I remember reading that. I don't have to look that one up. I could. And so that is what you're seeing here. If you don't have the book or the e-book, you didn't even go to the course site, review the PowerPoints. Oops. In the test questions, in the quizzes, it will say something like, according to your text, the researcher who discovered blah, blah, and then, you know, you're going to A, B, C, or D. You've got to read. And so what you have been seeing here is exactly the confusion and the loss of where am I here if you haven't read. The other reason I'm doing this, though, is because at some point I may rule with an open book test. I'm not a fan of them. I don't like open book. Students love them, but truthfully, open book tests are supposed to be for a certain kind of testing. We actually call it high order, where there's analysis, synthesizing of information, anyways, all of this. It's not so you can find who is Sigmund Freud, and then you have to find him on page 3, you know, it's not that. But that's what's starting to happen in college these days. But I do see a point in the semester where I could say, all right, this time I'm gonna do something open book. And I want you to get familiar with the material in your chapters. So, what I'm going to do right now with this sheet, I'm going to look at the first 4, I guess, yeah. First 3, and then I'm dropping to the bottom of the page to around number 14, 13, and we're gonna take those up together. See you next week. Oh, and can I say this just as you're leaving? For next week, the quiz, you can either do it on your own or in pairs. So think about it. If you're a cowboy, meaning you like to do your own thing, you'll get your quiz and you just do it and you go. If you would like to do it in a pair, sort of talk about it, challenge each other, you can still mark your own card. If you think it's A and I think it's C and you go, I don't think, you mark A, I'll mark C. You can't lose, but still, so you can decide, okay? See you next week.
Yeah.
So that will be a learning curve next week. It'll be your first quiz, right, on chapter 2 and 3. Not 1, because chapter 1 will be on your first test. But next week, when you come in, I'll review, just like I've been doing now, I'll review chapter 2 in the first hour, chapter 3 in the second hour, and then at the break, second break, I'll say, get into your pairs, or if you want to be on your own, and I'll give the quiz. So in my other section, there were some students who were sort of looking at each other already saying, do you want to be my partner? Do you want to do it? And others going, no, I'm doing it on my own. So if you think you'd like a partner for next week, you could check in with someone. I know it's new. You don't know each other. Make a friend. You don't have to be besties and be emailing each other, but to come into class and kind of know someone is kind of nice, isn't it, when you talk about marks. Okay, let's start with what I call the easy stuff, because the first couple, man, I just talked about them. All you had to do was remember hearing it, even if you didn't really get the concept. I'm going to give the answer. If you have something different, miss, you call me back and we talk about why you have a different answer. So number one, historically, how old were children when they reached the age of 7? Oh, that's funny, why I did that. Okay, yeah, the answer is 7. When they reached the age of reason. Number 2, he believed that children entered the world as a blank slate or tabula rasa. And you should have had John Locke, blank slate. Number 3, who were the ones that developed the first IQ test? You should have had Alfred Binet. And actually, he had a partner, Theo Simon. And no one ever mentions Theo, so I do it on his behalf. The two of them worked on developing an IQ test. And it was directly related to try and measure if children were meeting milestones. Were they progressing in a way that we expect them to if they're with scholarly teachers and they're passing tests, etc.? So IQs. There is some school of thought that parents knowing the IQ of their child can be a little bit dangerous. I say dangerous with a smile, right? Like, if you have your child tested at school, because they do IQ testing in school, and your child is gifted, what are you going to do about that? Do you want them fast-tracking with their math, with their science, with their Englishes? Do you want them to just kind of be a kid? And you know what? The smarts, they've got a whole lifetime to be smart. I remember when my daughter was in French immersion, her dad, my husband and I always said, you know, the 2 languages. And the teacher in JK said, put her in French. Oh my God. And she's an only child, so of course she's a chatter at home. She's like one of the adults almost, having opinions about things. I remember talking, my husband and I at the table, and we were saying something about the mortgage, you know, and or should we get the car because it's a heap and we need it. And all of a sudden she said, I think we should pay off the mortgage. I said, you're 7. This is it. But I could see what we've been doing. She'd been a part of our conversation. She was having opinions, and now all of a sudden I got grumpy. You know, this is not for you, this is Daddy and I. So we put her in French, and she did excel. And her father and I thought, our girl. And then math happened. Arithmetic, right? We call it arithmetic. And science, and then that whole epiphany that our child can be smart in something and not so smart in all the other stuff. And there's this amazing researcher by the name of Howard Gardner, and he was the first one to say something like this: we parents have been asking the wrong question. Is my child smart? What do you think? How are they doing? Are they good? He said, we need to reframe it and say, how is my child smart? How is my child smart? When you think about how you are smart, and you say, well, I'm, you know, pretty good, I'm smart with this, but over here, he said, kids are astute. They know what they're not smart in, as my daughter learned, right? Everyone does arithmetic. I don't get it, Mom. I don't get it. Crying, coming home with her worksheet, you know, and it was like a D+. And she would cry, why does everyone get it but me? And remember my line, because you didn't get the math gene. Mommy doesn't do math. Daddy can't do math. So Gardner said, it's our job to tell them. I said to her, parlez français, habla español, poco. So how is our child smart? But after all that was said and done, she still wanted to be smart in math. And so parenting, you have to be tuned in, we say dialed in to your child. The IQ test. I'm gonna skip down to the bottom around number 14. And if you didn't get that far, that's okay. We're gonna look at it now. This is known as in-the-field research. If anyone got there? Yes.
Naturalistic observation.
Yes, naturalistic observation. Oh, well, there you go, gathering information. Naturalistic observation means the observer is in the environment and not disrupting anything that's happening. And most of the people in the environment don't even know they're there. I could say to you now that my chair, that's my boss, could be in this classroom right now, because he's kind of a young dude and kind of looks a little cool, and he would just come in and sit, and you would look at him like, okay, he's got his laptop there, and he's watching, and he's getting a sense of the climate in the classroom. He's looking to see, is Maureen organized? Does she have content? And what is the interaction like with students? And I might be thinking, come on, people, like, help me out here, you know, hands up, a laugh and a joke. So the person who's doing the observing is not given attention. The problem with naturalistic observation is there's a subjectiveness by the observer. And that's not always fair, is it? Because subjectivity can skew, we say, skew the results, skew what the takeaway is. But there are many times that it's really helpful, and I'll give you one example. Up at Progress, we have an amazing daycare center, which is open as well to students to bring their kids in, drop them off at the daycare, then go to class. And you better believe you're gonna have great teachers there, because they're either students learning or they're the actual faculty who are looking after your kids. And students can come down on their break between classes and go behind that two-way mirror, and mom, or dad maybe, but mom, if you ever really want to see how your kid acts when you're not there, so does he share? Is he empathic? Does he clean up after himself? Because you've taught him at home to clean up. Or do you see little shades of him when he's not getting his way, when he doesn't want to share with someone else? And so we say naturalistic observation has both positives and some downfalls to it. Next one there, number 15. This type of research is about the strength of a relationship between variables. So over here, again, if you read PowerPoints before coming to class, remember these are all available to you. I've put my PowerPoints up. I've put up they're happy, they're going, man. I've uploaded the publishers as well. And remember I said to you, my PowerPoints are like 6 or 7. The publishers for chapter 1 is like 60. So they're there, it's another tool. But if you had looked this over and you hadn't even read, you would have seen correlational research is about a connection of sorts. We're not sure how strong the relationship is between this and this. We just know there's a connect. So, if you come to class regularly and do your reading, is it likely you'll pass the course? Yes, it's likely. If you come to class regularly, do your reading, does it mean you'll get an A? Is
students go, damn no. I've tried that. I've gone to every class, done my reading, and I still got a C+. And we say that reflects that there's other things that have to be taken into account, isn't it? You might say, I did the reading and I hardly understood it. You might say, I thought I understood it, but that teacher is a hard marker, and I didn't get what so we talk about the variables. So the correlational research, we say yes. Is there a relationship here between this? Yes, but we don't know how strong it is. If you grow up in poverty, is there a chance you may get involved in crime?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a chance. But we also know you can't say this equals that, this causes that. Tell you, I remember the first time I went into a metro housing complex, I was doing something called a pre-sentence report on a girl. She was going to be sentenced by the judge, and the judge wanted me to do a family history, And the girl was rough. I'm just gonna say she had a rough edge. And so I got all, professional looking. I put on my important government suit, and I had my briefcase, and I went into the complex. And it is like the stereotype. The walls are thin. I remember walking down the hallway and I could hear click, 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 the echo of my heels in the hallways. And I knocked at the door and my heart was sort of pounding because I thought, metro housing. And I've seen it on TV. And so when I knocked, the door opened and Grandma answered. And she had her pearls on, and she had her nice dress and her lipstick, and she welcomed me in, and I could see she'd set the table for tea and little baked muffins or whatever, and I thought, so the correlation. Is there a correlation maybe between growing up in an area where there is poverty all around you, lack of resources, and someone getting involved in crime? Yes, but one does not equal the other. And aren't we so lucky? Because it's the human condition that we can aspire to break cycles, be better than, and yes, to have a mom or a dad who, despite where you're growing up, keeps you grounded and keeps you what we call on your true north. True north, right? So, correlational. Let's move along. We're almost at break time. What do researchers try to test during an experiment? Do you know that even from your science yet?
Independent and dependent variables.
Okay. That's coming up, but what do researchers try to test?
Oh.
Yes. Number 16. Okay, nope. Hypothesis. Yeah, it's a hypothesis. That's what's giving way to doing an experiment in the first place. It's from a hypothesis. You create the experiment. The experiment either shows that the hypothesis is correct. We call it that educated guess. And now you're able to formulate a theory. Right? It's from the hypothesis. So that's what I'm looking for there. Page 17, actually, if you haven't read it yet. Now, number 17, researchers manipulate this in the experimental method. Yes, the independent variable. So the independent variable is what the researchers say, well, 2 cups of coffee didn't create the high blood pressure. Let's now make sure they have 4 cups of coffee in 2 hours. So they change instead of 2 to 4, and now they measure the blood pressure after 4 cups of coffee. So the blood pressure they can't touch, right? Because the blood pressure is the blood pressure.
but they can manipulate how much coffee you're having. So independent variable. Turnover, number 18. This research design studies different age groups at one time. Different age groups. Yes. Good one. Leading it off right there. So the thing is, longitudinal versus cross-sectional. Longitudinal, all you have to do here is think of a long time. Same group for a long time you're studying. The problem with longitudinal is it gets expensive. And the manpower. If you're going to follow the same group of students for 3 years, you go, oh my God, they're going to be all over the place. We have to have people to interview. And money is always the problem. If you do cross-sectional, you might say something like this. All students between the ages of 18 to 20, we're going to study this semester. During the same semester, we're going to study also 20 to 22. Get me? 22 to 24, all in the same semester, but by different age groups. And then researchers try to do something like this. We say extrapolate the changes that they're seeing. All these 18 to 20-year-olds listen to this kind of music. I know it's impossible, but they're going to say that. And then funny enough, the genre of music they were listening to then, once they got to 21, it's funny, they stepped away from it. They still said, oh yeah, that was what I used to, but I'm not feeling it anymore. You know, and you say, wow, my taste is changing. And so longitudinal versus cross-sectional. There is a group of people that were studied. It's in the States. I'm going to get the name. I keep forgetting the name of it. They were studied for something like 22 years. It's the most famous longitudinal study done in the US for sure, but maybe the world. The same people they followed. And through that time, some of them died, some of them got married, some of them had babies, but that longitudinal study cost a lot of money, but showed amazing research. And that was the big takeaway. And here we go, the last one on the back. Oh, people born at roughly the same time frame, they're called a cohort. My cohort group, born after the Second World War, between 1945 and 1965. What group is that?
Boomers?
Yes, that's me. I'm a boomer. 1945 to 1965. It was the baby boom. Soldiers, nurses, doctors, everyone who was involved in that World War, Second World War, came back home. And Canada did some very cool things. One of the things they did was they offered free education, free university education, because there was no college then, right? You know, Centennial College is the first college in the province. Yeah. There was no college. You went only to university, finish high school or university. So they said to these men and women returning, we will educate you any program you want, any degree, we will pay. Then the second thing they did, not totally free, but they built something called post-war bungalows. And they're the small bungalows that still can be found, mostly in downtown Toronto, and then out towards Oshawa, Bowmanville, Cobourg. And these bungalows were almost like this big. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, small, and almost for free, almost, to say thank you. And those returning men and women then got married, had babies.
that would be me, my brother, my sister. And we say a whole new infrastructure developed, certainly in Ontario and even across Canada. Baby boomers. Then we have Generation X. We have the millennials. Many of you identify as a millennial, typically between 1980, 84 to about 2000, isn't it? Anyways, you know where you fall. You are a cohort group. And finally, researchers don't reveal the names of their subjects due to, yes, confidentiality. And I'm okay if you wrote ethics, that's okay. We're a big believer here in North America that when we get people to volunteer who are willing to be a part of research about the mind and how we think, that we protect their integrity at all costs. It was very different in the old days. There was none of that protectionism around. Nowadays, a doctor can face big liability if he gives away your name, any information that ties back to you. So, I have 5:20. Take 10, because you need it. And then for the last 40 minutes, we're going to look at the theories and take up the middle sheet. Okay? Remember, I'm thinking of the test. You're not. You're thinking of the quiz. But I need to make sure you got this for the first test. Okay? Take a break.
So just to confirm, the quiz next week is gonna be on chapter 2 and 3, right?
Correct.
So that's our study material for
Yes,
that.
so my expectation would be, when you leave here today, if you haven't read chapter 1 properly and did that, let it go. Your focus is on 2 and 3. Now, I review for the first hour, chapter 2, and then we'll have a break, and then I review chapter 3, take a break, and I'll say, if you're doing it in pairs, scrum together as a pair. If you're doing it on your own, I might say, people doing it on your own, come up front, because I shouldn't see your mouths move if you're doing it on your own. If you're doing it in a pair, then you scrum together. You can talk about it, debate. Still mark your own card if you don't agree with your partner, but if you convince them that, yeah, it's probably A, lucky, right? You help each other. And there are 5 small assessments, and I take your best 4. So if you were here last week, you heard that. I'm just reminding you, if you weren't here, it's in the topical.
Yes.
They're worth 5% each. So you've already tried the download?
Yeah. And that's the message that keeps coming.
So that's what it's doing, it's downloading. Okay. Does it come up? Now, what half the class just did, when I pushed the button for that screen, y'all looked up. It's called conditioning. Not all of you, half did, and it was like white noise. Yeah, I know that noise. But the other half of you, I was watching, looked up and then went back down. Classical conditioning says a stimulus and a response. The stimulus can be a sound, a taste, a smell. Whatever the stimulus it is, it did something in you, created a behavior, a reaction. And so what I'm going to do now over this last 40 minutes-ish, now see, to me that looks scary. I'd rather hear about kids and learning from, I'm saying that, is that a circuit, I guess? I don't know. So, in your text, from page 3 to, I think it's about 14, if you have your text, regarde. If you don't, make a note. From 3 to 14 is all theories of development. The other pages, there was a page on the debates, there was about a page and a half on how we study development, which is surveys, questionnaires, natural observation. Remember, I'm recapping for you. Then correlational research. Is there a relationship of sorts between this and this? And if there is, how strong is the relationship? Remember, that's when we get into variables. The only type of research that shows cause and effect is the research that we get from the experimental method. The experimental method involves what we call empirical research. It's empirical evidence. It means the standards, the rigor that was set in the experiment is pristine, is very particular. There is a control group, there's a random group, there's independent variables, there's a dependent variable. There might be a placebo. That you get me? Basic science coming back to you. All of the things that have to be in place. And if the experiment is done right, to standards and conditions, we say you will get empirical research. It is the best. And what that means is you have quality research, and you have quantity. I call it the 2 Qs. 2 Qs. Because to say we had great quality research, we think we have found a cure for pancreatic cancer. And I go, oh my God, my dad has pancreatic. Well, the research we've collected so far, great results. Well, I haven't heard of it. How many people were involved? Well, 2. Oh. You gotta have the quality and you gotta have the quantity. The idea when you have done a great experiment is you should be able to replicate that experiment at any time and come back with the same result. And that's why experiments that have great results, reliable results, cost money, requires commitment from the researchers and the participants, and it has to perform under all kinds of conditions. That's the only research that proves something. That's why now we have proof that smoking causes cancer. Actually, it's nicotine, isn't it? The nicotine causes cancer. They put on the package, smoking this can kill you. And we still go, it's the human condition that we know something and we do it anyways. Mums, if you drink through pregnancy, we know there is proof. Alcohol causes birth defects. The defects can be cognitive, right? The thinking, judging, decision-making, problem-solving, and, or, not both all the time, physical. Cleft palate, flattened face, wide-set eyes, heart problems. And a child with FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, they're on the spectrum, they're often the kids that other kids don't like. He's weird, she's strange, I don't want her at my party. And it's not the child's fault. Mom drank through pregnancy. And so we have all kinds of research out there that proves things, but we're humans, and we think it's not gonna happen to me. It's called the fallacy, right? It's called the personal fable. It's in the book. And it says, we wanna resort to the old, but it won't happen to me.
I won't get caught impaired driving. I only live 3 blocks away. We don't say them walk. You know, I'm only going 3 blocks, man. I know the side streets, blah, blah, blah. And so lots to think about when we talk about what does the research say. Now, these theories from page 3 to 14. 6 theories. 3 of them we're going to talk about all the time. I feel bad over here because they have important people too, and they are in the book. I think they're pretty easy to understand, but we don't talk about them on a regular basis. So keeping time in mind and overload for y'all, I'm going to focus over here for now. When you are studying, you should take a peek, take a look at the PowerPoints, just to get a sense of what it is they're saying. But these 3 theories, the theorists associated with them, we talk about them for the next 18 chapters. So, écoutez, listen. In psychology, it's nearly always the first theory you hear about, psychoanalytic theory, because the most famous psychoanalytic thinker, the most famous one, is a name we all seem to recognize. Does anyone know the name I'm referring to? Psychoanalytic thinking? Okay, well that killed my point, didn't it? Does anyone know the name Freud?
Yes.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
I knew it. I just had to take you there a little. Sigmund Freud. Freud was an Austrian. Not that that really matters, but he's European. Europeans in general are often forward thinking, and they think out of the box compared to a lot of us in North America, right? More open-minded, more open to, anyways. Freud, I'm going to try to summarize it as best I can, was a big believer in the unconscious mind. Unconscious and the importance of our libido. Libido, another word for our sex drive, right? And we go, okay, wait a minute. The unconscious and the sex drive, how do you link that? So Freud had a theory, you will read about it, called the psychosexual, not psycho, right? Like the psychological, psychosexual theory. And that theory is called the stage theory. There are different stages in this development. Freud's theory had 5 stages. And I'm not putting them all up because you need to learn that. I will tell you, oral, anal, phallic, latency, genital. All stage theories, like his, we're going to get into others, but all stage theories starts in infancy. That makes sense, right? Right from babies. So when you think of the oral stage and infancy, we think oral refers to the mouth. Babies and their need to suckle. Babies will do it even in their sleep. Yeah, moms or siblings are around and you stand, you know, the last look at night, one more look at the baby, is she good, is she, and you stand there looking at, and those little cheeks are pulling, and in their dream, they're suckling. Freud said, if a baby's oral needs are not met early in life, if they don't get enough suckling, whether it's at mom's breast, through breastfeeding, through, we called it the soother, or the sucky, whatever you call it. If they don't get enough infancy, they can become fixated. That means stuck in sort of that psychosexual stage. Now, we would say, well, what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? If you say stuck, if you're the 15-year-old or 20-year-old and you didn't get enough suckling as a baby, what does it look like?
I was gonna guess, that you're probably gonna develop like habits where like you're gonna bite your nails or you're gonna
Yes, yes, exactly. So the nail biting, the need to have something in there, here you go. Smokers, Freud would say, you have an issue, and it goes back to infancy. Overeaters, we talk about comfort food, think of the term, comfort food. Eating too much often satisfies a need, and Freud would say you are stuck in that infant oral stage.
So if I remember correctly, it's either if you get weaned early or if you're on it too long. So how do you know?
The
what's
sweet
right?
spot. Yeah. And so that's just it. He would respond, that is where your role as the mother or the caregiver needs to determine what, I'll say again, the sweet spot is, about when is it enough. So in these times, what we know nowadays is there is an organization called the La Leche League who are big proponents of breastfeeding a baby, toddler, child, as long as that child is asking for it. So it's funny, I have a friend, Linda, who had 3 kids, and the last one she didn't think she would have, and it was a girl. She was so thrilled. She had her 2 boys, and so she was breastfeeding Ava, and Ava was now, I guess, about 10 months, like not walking, so still a baby. And her 3-year-old boy would come along and pull her shirt. And while Ava was on one breast, Linda would lift her shirt, and the 3-year-old would go on her other breast. And my sister and I would go, oh,
That's actually a lot more common now than, yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, when is it time? We know nutritionally, the 3-year-old does not need that breast, nutritionally. He's now eating foods, isn't he? Breads, fruits, Baby, I think you could argue there's still nutritional things, needs being met. But the 3-year-old, it's different issues that are, I say issues, different ideas that are operating there. And Linda was still okay with that. She also had the privilege of being home for a long time. They had the finances that allowed her to stay at home for a long time, and she could cater to the demands, couldn't she? Most women, we would say, don't have that opportunity, and you're back at work or you're working part-time, and to be breastfeeding more than one at a time would become a real strain, real strain. So oral, one more example, anal. Anal for Freud has to do with potty training. That is a big deal in infant development, potty training. It's a milestone. Mums and dads will go, they're potty trained. Do you know how much diapers cost? And so mums are going, they're out of diapers, you know, they're in the big boy pull-ups or whatever. But what does it mean to be stuck in the anal stage? Anal suggests bowel movements, urinating, and there are babies, toddlers, who struggle. They don't like it. They don't like having to go to a toilet, and they don't like even when their diaper gets full. It's just how they're wired. And so it can be very traumatic for those little ones. Freud would say, if you try to pressure them, push them along to get them out of diapers, they will become fixated or stuck. What does that mean as a big person? Freud said, it is the person, so potty training is about letting go. You get the euphemism, letting go or not holding on. In adult terms, it's this. You are someone who won't spend your money. You know who you are. I'm not looking at anyone. You know when you have that 20 in your wallet, and you know how you think, if I break this 20, what happens? It's gone. It's your turn to buy a round. You're out with the boys or the girls, and every time it's your turn, what ends up happening? I'm out of here, guys. Yeah, I got work in the morning, and yeah, fun, catch you later, and everyone's going. Every time it's his turn. In arguments, you can't let go of an issue. You know, the letting go. You carry a grudge. So Freud would say being able to let go shows, right, that you have moved on. If you hold on to things, you have issues. And so that's how these little stages of being anal, oral, phallic, whatever, we say manifest, how they show themselves in our later years. Freud, unconscious mind and our sexual development. He had a student, and I like this guy, his name is Erickson, Erik Erikson. Erikson looked up to Freud. He liked his stuff. He said the unconscious is real. We're not aware of what's going on below the surface. But he said, with all due respect, I don't think it's about the potty training and the breastfeeding and all of the sexual energy. I believe it's about relationships. And at every stage of development, there's what he called a crisis. Now, I don't mean it in that literal sense. When we hear crisis, we think, a crisis. What he meant was there is something that has to be sorted out. In infancy, remember, all stage theories start in infancy. Erikson said the crisis, the thing that has to be sorted out for babies, is trusting their caregiver. Erikson said a baby must form trust or attachment with the caregiver. The baby needs to feel they are loved, that when they cry, she will come to me. Because I've learned, I cry, she comes. When I fall and am scared, he picks me up. And so the crying that baby does, Erikson said, is not just about, well, they have no words, so they cry. It's part of it. But he says it's also their way of saying, who will show me that I'm worthy, that I'm lovable? I kind of like that about Erikson. It's nice and simple, and it makes sense to me for infant development. And his theory was called psychosocial. And he had 8 stages. And you can look in your book, as you will, and you will see the 8, it's in a chart there. Can you see it? I don't know if it, is that it? Page 7, I like that nicely laid out chart, and it shows you from now up until, adulthood, late adulthood, the different stages we're going to consider. Can I have a time check?
5:57.
Okay. Learning. So you get it. Psychoanalytic thinking, unconscious, always a part of it, and then depending who you are buying into, one believes in the sex drive being behind everything we're really doing. Erikson said unconscious, but it's all about relationships and something that has to be conquered during that stage of development. I like in adolescence, ego, identity, the identity versus role confusion. So many young people lose their way during adolescence. And so Erickson would say this struggle at 14, 16, 17 to sort of be comfortable in your own skin and recognize, what your values are. You chum with him, but do you really have the same values, So Erickson was very clear over the lifetime, not just in the first 5 or 6 years of life. Freud, big believer in the first 5 to 6 years. He said after that, you're pretty much done. And the critics went, what? Really? The first 5 and 6 years? And Freud went, yes. That's how deeply profound those first few years are. Learning. I'm a big believer in this here. We use this a lot with kids who are in custody, kids who are in group homes, foster care. Learning theory says we look at behaviors and we keep in mind thinking. Behaviors and thinking. But let me just put the names down first before I start discussing. So we have Watson, remember these are all in your PowerPoints. I'm just doing the lecture part with you now. Watson believed it's observable behavior, not unconscious. He said, basically, don't get into all this, the unconscious. What's making you do something? How can you possibly measure unconscious motivation? You can't measure it. And your unconsciousness compared to mine, we're both doing the same thing, but your motivation is different from mine. How can you measure it? So Watson said, I think we should be paying attention to behaviors we're seeing. And the way he wanted to test and measure behavior was by using classical conditioning. And I gave you an example of that when I said I put up the screen, the stimulus, taste, touch, smell, sound. Curry. Right? I don't know how y'all feel, but I love curry. The smell of it. I remember coming home on a winter's day, right? I'd come into the house cold and you'd kick off your boots and your backpack, and I'd go up our little stairs and into the kitchen, and my dad was there. Curry stains, right? So he always had this old towel that we had tucked into his belt, and he'd be stirring and adding. And I'd look over and he'd look at me, give me a wink. Hello, girl, how was the day? Were you a scholar? Did you do? And I remember clearly feeling like I'm home, it's safe, it smells good. When I smell curry, the stimulus, that's what I still think about. My friend, Paula, goes, "Ooh, I hate that smell. Who's having curry? When you get off an elevator and that's all you smell?" I said, "I like it." "Why don't you like it?" "Well, it smells, and I just said, eh. She's Italian, she's used to garlic, I love that too. So we say, what is the stimulus? It elicits a response. Maybe a little closer to home, especially since we've talked about pedophile we had a young girl who was coming down to court, and she was going to have to testify at court, not in the courtroom with the offender there, in another room, but the video would be on her. To make a long story short, we were preparing her for what would happen in the courtroom, and Madam Crown, the Crown, acting on the accused, was interviewing her and explaining what would happen and what it would look like and feel like. And so we were over here in a cubicle, and the door over there opened, and one of the court clerks came in, a young guy, about 27, 28. And as he walked by, the young girl sort of, we say clenched, and her back went up, and what? The cologne that he was wearing. The smell of the cologne that young man was wearing triggered a response from her. And I don't know if you're making the leap here with me, but so it turned out the offender wore that same cologne. And the mother knew it. Once the mother caught on, and what? She said to us, that scent. Of course, we went over and asked him to leave out the other door, not to come back again. So a stimulus can be uplifting, joyful, warm, but you get me? But it can also work in mysterious ways and in hurtful ways. Most of the way we live our life in these busy times is through conditioning. Kids are in the schoolyard, they hear the bell ring, what do they do? Yeah, you can't, and they don't want to be late, right? So they're running, the girls typically are holding hands, and they're running to, it's the way they roll. Now we know initially they're sort of taught, but there's also watching others, understanding you hustle. You don't just, because madame or the teacher is going to be there going, so they typically run. And we say the classical conditioning, the bell, and then it is supported by what they're observing. All their other friends are running too. And that's actually a guy named Bandura, Albert Bandura, who said the importance of role models in our lives. He said, the role models in our young child's life, the ones they look up to, whether it's the sports fans, the Kyle Lowry, the DeMar Rosen, I miss him, and all the other, the stars, the hockey players, the singers and bands. Bandura would say, if your young one looks up to them, you better hope those big guys are good guys. And why do you think the Raptors go out and do meet and greets? And Kyle Lowry, every time he's back, still goes to the local center that he and the wife contribute, if you know Kyle Lowry, right? The Raptors fan. And so they do things like that because they know that their image and their persona is really looked up to by all these young kids. Bandura, Albert Bandura, is a Canadian, and when you're looking at the PowerPoint, you'll probably see my maple leaf there. I don't know if you noticed it, but that's like We the North, right? Bandura's theory is so simple that we now would go, well, okay, yeah, we get it, the importance of role models, but someone had to stop and think about it and do research on it. He also said the opposite. If your little one is chumming around with another edgy kid, maybe light-fingered, little stealing, little chopsiness, we say at home, don't be chopsy, and starting to make some bad decisions, Bandura said, if your child really likes them, you better be prepared to see some of the behaviors being adapted.